Welcome back from that, and thank you to the behavioral checks team. The overall wellness that we enjoy is always welcomed here. Well, we're moving on now. Since the removal of fuel subsidy, it seems like there's been a free fall of the naira in the market, in the forex market. How can we ensure that the purchasing power of Nigerians is restored and we can have production in Nigeria's economy that will boost the GDP? That's what we'll be discussing. And to do justice to this is Dr. Abdulaziz Bala Abubakar. He's a financial management and tax consultant. Thank you so much for being part of the program.
It's a pleasure.
Good morning, Dr. Abdullah Abubakar. Welcome and thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure having me.
Okay, good. So it's no more, we're not speculating anymore. The dollar is, and the naira is deeply depreciating. The buying power of the naira is next to nothing, and that happened drastically, especially with the removal of the fuel subsidy. From 195, we're now at 300% increment, and Nigerians are groaning. We have a new government in place, and then luckily for us, finally, the portfolios of ministers will be assigned, because part of the speculations was because we didn't have ministers assigned to certain positions, that's why things were not going. But you will agree as a financial management that the economy is crying. What should we be doing? What should we be looking at, especially with this fuel subsidy removal that's creating a major part of the hardship?
First, let me correct certain impression. Yeah, talking of two main elements here. The fuel subsidy is different. The forex issue is another different thing.
Exactly.
Now, with the history of this country, the issue of subsidy has grossly been mismanaged. It's even a fraud, according to some quarters. So for me, removal of subsidy is a welcome idea. It's in fact very diplomatic in nature. But what you should be guiding again is about how to now use this removal of subsidy to alleviate the suffering of the people. Normally, removal of subsidy everywhere in the world comes with certain hardship. Unfortunately, this is a country where we got our independence through round table conference. We don't seem to want to suffer, and or maybe we don't seem to want to persevere in trying to tackle solution. Now, there are two angles to it. Number one, there are policymakers who are not focused, and there are policymakers who are excessively focused. Now, if I look at the issue based on the history of the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is somebody who is also a financial guru, is somebody who has development at the back, is somebody who revitalized something from nothing. So in that situation, we give him that benefit of doubt to also revamping the whole large economy of this country. So if that is the case, we should be looking at that issue of palliative, at least for a period of, at minimum period of 6 months. We should be, and then the palliative issue should be treated in three separate ways. Number one, for it to be very effective, you have to decentralize the issue of palliative policy. What I mean by decentralization is this. Palliative measures differ from states to states. So it is not possible for you quantumly to decide and say, okay, you are using a generalized palliative measure for the entire country. No, the solution will not be there. So if you now decentralize it, based on their constant meeting with the National Economic Council, you have a serious solution. Now they have what they call, the World Bank has developed what they call a social book in every state, so that you identify the poorest of the poorest, you also identify the women household, you also identify the youth. That will help a lot. So what we need to do is that to tell the state government to be proactive this time with minimum or maximum supervision. Because the issue is the implementation. When it comes to implementation, we normally have problem with the state government. So I'm happy Bola Tinubu is not a president that you just say, okay, do this without proper supervision. Again, in addition, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation will come into stay. Because it is expected that in every state of the federation, they must have a liaison office as a guide, you understand, towards augmenting whatever policy the state government are doing. In that situation, the effect of this palliation will not be fed. Then secondly, we have to go into what I call massive food production in state. There are food production that you can even generate within 3 months of growth. They will be able to get there. so that at the end of the day, at least imagine the long-term effect, you will not be able to have surplus food and ensuring food security. It's not enough using, maybe giving increase in wage rate, minimum wage rate. You see, I am not a protagonist of increase in minimum wage rate, because it's not a solution in this, because it has what I call a multiplier effect. If you increase wage rate by 2,000,
every other thing will increase.
The market rate will increase by more than 5 or 10,000. So the issue is that there's what they call rural and urban inflation, which is prominent in a country like Nigeria here. If you are able to curb some of the inflationary spiral, how will you be able to cause the local and the urban and rural inflation caused by what they call demand pull inflation,
exactly,
and also cost push inflation? So these are various areas in which we try as much as possible to make sure that poverty alleviation is all about impact on every citizen. When you feel it, then the issue of condensed gas, condensed gas is another thing. When you make vehicle available, you are indirectly saying that with different allocation to every, again, it's the responsibility of the states to do this, to see how many number of civil servants we have, for the purpose of ensuring the successes of this implementation.
Yeah. Good point. Okay, sorry,
okay.
Yeah,
I just wanted to ask, you are a tax consultant and an economic expert.
Yes.
Do you think this government has shown policy direction when it comes to how to even cushion the effect and see that that inflation, especially food inflation that's rising? Do you think the government has so far made good policies?
You see, when somebody, I want to just make an example, when somebody spends 3 days reading for an exam, then commonsensically, after that 3 days, is supposed to go and rest so that the effect of that exam at least will be minimized. But unfortunately, he starts taking Panadol extra, to make him strong. So he's tackling what I call the effect and not the cause. You see, previous government, what has been causing problem for us in this country, they've been tackling the effect of that without attacking the root cause of the problem. You see, based on history, we assume, and this is a consultative government, a government that consults, a government that listens, a government that brings in experts, a government that wants to understand what the expert wants to advise, a government that evaluates what after the advice, a government that evaluates the expert's advice and see what the effect of the advice will be on the entire scenario. So if you have a government like that, which implies a democratic government, and when you have a democratic norm in any economy, there's the possibility or the propensity of success in any policy implementation will be very high. So I assure you that both this government will surely succeed, particularly in the area of tax reform. Because the problem we have in this country is less revenue, more expenditure. Because most of the revenue areas are not generating enough, and that is why we have what we call high public debt. And when you have high public debt, you'll be subject to control. And that is why we are not even antagonistic. Some of this IMF policy, which negates our economy. I am a person that believes in Africanization of the economy, because the solution to African economy or the Nigerian economy is more of Africa rather than, because you develop what is an organized economy. So what you think is possible in the developed world, it may not be possible in the. So you have to look for a homegrown economics that will address essentially the localized problem of the Nigerian economy.
Okay. Inflation rate, 24.08%, the highest that the country has ever had. And of course, we're looking at everything you said is very laudable. We should decentralize palliatives, and they should come from the states. They actually know the people, they know where they are, they know. So all of this theoretically are things that are sensible to do, but we Nigerians haven't really seen the good faith or the absolute trust in the human factor of implementing this. We saw it last administration with the humanitarian ministry that it wasn't effective. No, people didn't even know who received the money. There are also people that are arguing that we should go beyond cash palliatives. And the government had first initially proposed 8,000 naira per 12 million households for Nigeria. And people are saying, how sustainable is that, especially when you're already groaning from the hardship of the economy? CBN just released our financial, will I call it our financial report of the country, which they hadn't even done for years. And as an economist or business analyst, you will know it is very worrisome. What about the refineries? Shouldn't we be having conversations as more sustainable palliatives for people and say, okay, yes, the CNG should be done, but how many states are able to produce that? How many states are able to even buy the buses and put them on the road? Abuja alone, we have quite a number of. What happened to the El Rufai buses? These are things that we should be exploring. Then we're also looking at the high cost of governance, which Nigeria is very guilty of. How do we balance all of this issues to help actualize the policies that the federal government is saying to elevate people's suffering?
Well, let me take you one about the high cost of governance, particularly in terms of ministerial nomination.
Yes.
Is constitutional.
Explain further, please.
Constitutional in the sense that the Constitution says you have to take in a minister from every
state. That's 36.
So, if you are taking 36 governors,
that's 37 if you include
including FCT. If you are taking 37, you understand, which implies that every one of these ministers will come with attractive costs,
Agreed.
which sometimes essentially may not be managed. So the first thing we try to do is to see how realistically we can amend the Constitution to reflect the economic reality of this country.
But we're talking about 45 now. So why 45 now? Why isn't every administration stopping at the constitutional accepted figure of 37 if we're really exploring?
You see, there's what they call normative, what ought to be.
Okay.
There is the political consideration.
Okay.
And again, in some states, for example, you have a very large state, like Bayelsa, for example, Cross River, and Kano. When you say you pick one from Kano, you pick one from Bayelsa, that is not even the issue. So they said what they call federal representation, and then equity in terms of making choices, making appointments. These are some of the considerations, which to me has a very great economic consequence, but has a lot of political advantage to whoever the politicians are. You know, these are relatively what we are trying to say. So if you amend the Constitution to reflect this reality after some time, then it will go a long way to solve some of these costs of government. You can't say from the air you start reducing everything. You can't do that. And that, I'll give you an example. You have to go from the start. You have to tackle the effect. What gave room for that higher government is the Constitution. So the Constitution needs to be amended. Once we amend it to reflect reality, maybe this time in terms of geopolitical zone, at least to minimize, maybe you say 2 per geopolitical zone. So if you have 6, that is 12 ministers, for example. Or maybe even 14, 18 ministers. These are some of the things you have to do. You know, these are realistically things you have to do. And going further, the issue of forex, particularly the monetary and physical policy, need to be at equilibrium. If they are far away, normally there will be deficiency in terms of policy implementation.
Yes, yes.
You see, there's what they call the IS and LM curve, which incidentally is what they call the monetary and the physical policy. At any point in time, it has to be near equilibrium. Even the developed economy is not yet in equilibrium, but it's almost at par. But if you look at during the former regime, there is serious
huge disparity, yes,
between the monetary policy and the physical policy.
Yes.
And that is why we had a lot of problems. And remember, when you have some economic degradations in terms of policy implementation, it will be very terrible. It will be very, you can't just adjust or solve the problem in the very short run. It takes a very capable leader. It takes a very economic-minded person. It takes a very bold and confident leader to readjust and be able to sort out some of these problems. Why do we have, for example, the federal government say they want to unify the exchange rate? Why are they unifying the exchange rate? Because there's what they call official market and what they call the parallel market. And this parallel market is something that is illegal it results from what they call illicit trading. And you know, parallel market, number one, is very expensive. Number two, it has a distorting effect on the participant. Number three, it impairs what they call economic growth and development. You understand? And the question now is that for government to be able to tackle the inefficiency in the parallel market, they have to embark what I call strict capital control. What do I mean by strict capital control? Because it relies, apart from the revenue, which is short, the federal government relies on capital importation. But unfortunately, these capital importations, sometimes they don't go official because of the bottleneck, even in the CBN. One, conditionalities, differential interest rate, as well as what we call inflationary rate. Number two, because of the perverse level of corruption in CBN. Because if you are coming with $20,000, they say, look, $5,000 is for this, and only 15. So rather, what they normally do is that they look for individual with account in United States or something, they put it there. And this individual is taking this money straight to the parallel market and then use it for the purpose of generating revenue, which is inimical. Sometimes this parallel market sometimes makes even World Bank project irrelevant because you don't see the effect.
Exactly.
You understand? So these are some of the things. First is, I'm happy the government now is trying to see how they can control capital flights. And the only thing they can do that is to restrict that. Then secondly, there is the domesticated money currency too. Maybe stolen by most of these public officials, kept in their house, and normally pushed to sometimes cause confusion within the economic cycle. That again, you need what we call economic intelligence to be able to sort out, to be able to localize these people, so as to know the amount of money.
Are those the ones you call spectators? Because I know that CBN had a press conference the other day and then said that speculators rather,
we're harming the
forex. And then after that meeting, we saw that from 9:40 as of Tuesday, dollar dropped yesterday to 780, and then as of today, it's floating between that 770, 780, 810. So is it those speculators, people that you're talking about now, that caused this parallel market and then caused the spike in the naira?
Yeah, because one thing is this. These speculators are also traders.
Okay.
Because they believe in what I call economic unproductiveness. What I call unproductive is just like me having $5 million. I take it to the parallel market to exchange. It's unproductive. I have $5 million, I open a factory. I employ people.
It's productive.
There's risk. It's productive.
Yes.
I don't know whether you are getting it.
Yes.
So that level of unproductivity, because they are not subjected to any risk, and the person employing, sometimes because of labor or something, could even be subjected to risk. So unless the federal government decides to balance this situation,
okay,
then again that will effectively be used in terms of policy implementation, and that's why you need a very sound finance minister, a very sound CBN governor that understands the rhythm of the economic situation, that is able to domesticate some of the economic principle. Because you don't bring in somebody who is, is a World Bank person. You bring him in.
And it's not relatable to the Nigerian.
Because he has operated in an organized economy. Whereas you have an unorganized economy here. For him to be able to do that, he has to domesticate himself. That is why I, for one, I don't believe in what they call, I'm an economist that don't believe in GDP. But rather, I believe in what I call African Development Product. GDP is nothing other than the measure of goods and services, or the goods and services. You see, you don't determine growth just using the measure of goods and services. But the African Development Product, I had expected professors in economics to be able to challenge GDP, to see how relevant some of this GDP will be effectively used in the African continent.
Now, I want to understand what your African concept,
African Development
Product.
Yes.
The concept of it, I don't understand. What then do you measure growth with?
Thank you very much. You see, the GDP too is a coefficient of measurement.
Right.
You understand what I'm trying to say? It values goods and services.
It does.
In monetary terms. But the question now is that for the developed world, they have what they call real and nominal GDP, which essentially I don't believe in. They call real, it includes inflation. They call nominal, it doesn't include inflation. But when we are using the GDP in this country, we oversimplify, using some assumptions that are entirely relevant to African economic setting. And so, for example, if they say the Nigerian economy is growing at 4%, how do we measure that 4%? When there is poverty, when there is malnutrition, when there is perverse unemployment. So how can you grow? Then how else do they have that 4%? So the African development product is in its own, it operates in what I call a matrix.
Okay.
It takes into consideration the decadent nature of the economic situation in Africa, and then formulate them using the concept. So if the African development product now say 2% growth, they know realistically is 2% growth rate, because it are taking into consideration sectoral imbalances. These are basically what I'm trying to say. And unless we are able to domestic or Africanize our economy, we will not grow. Why do we look for aid from America or World Bank when entirely we have mineral resources and all these developmental items in the country? Because we have made ourselves to believe that we are not developed, they are developed, and that's why we are economically inferior. So these are the basic things we have to do.
So what about the refinery? Because we're talking about fuel subsidy, and I asked you that earlier on. How can we ensure that if we really, because of course we've agreed that market forces does determine the price of fuel, which is where majority of Nigerians, is one commodity that majority of Nigerians use one way or the other. And of course, Nigerians are hoping that Dangote refinery will be working by now, which of course we haven't seen that happening. What should we expect the government to be doing to ensure that we have at least one refinery? The president has said that by December, we'll have a refinery working. And we've had several administrations say that. I know during President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, they'll tell you 20% functional, 10%, or, certain percentages, and we never saw any functional. How are we sure that, what should the government be doing also to look at that thing as a major solution to the hardship that the fuel crisis is causing?
There are 2 or 3 aspects here.
Okay.
Number one is to assume the economy has no refinery and you want to operate a genuine economy.
Okay.
Number 2 is to assume that refinery will be built within a particular period of time. These are 2 classes now. The first thing again is this. First of all, in the immediate run, you liberalize the economy by privatizing even the NMDC. Because what I'm saying is this. For you to allow free flow so that the market force can determine, you can't succeed with NMPC still dictating, still monitoring on the number of fuel supplies. The only thing is to establish an agency that monitor the quality of fuel supply, but allow everybody to bring in fuel. Fuel is a perishable item. Nobody will allow his or her own fuel to remain on ground for a particular, because they want to achieve a 670 liter per 607 naira per liter. You understand? So it is going to be what I call a cutthroat competition, which is doable in this country. While at the same time trying as much as possible to ensure that you prepare the refinery in line with the anticipation. Number 2, there's what they call discriminatory pricing. You don't expect in Nigeria, because dollar has increased in the international market, you expect Nigeria to pay the same thing with something operating in the international market. And in that situation is this oil is domesticated. You understand? It's either you have to say, okay, 80% of the oil will be exported. 20% will be in a domestic content. And that domestic content will have to be given a priority. Priority in the sense that is what I call consideration, because it's a priority in itself. They buy this oil, they refine it at a localized sum. So there's no way they will bring this 20% fuel and sell it at a very high price. For the international market, you can do whatever you do. This is a way of turning around the livelihood of individual people in this country. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Unless and until you try to do that, it's possible. When the refineries come, like Dangote now, they will even say they will want to be pricing this at an international market. which is not proper. While you are pricing at international market, fuel is increasing. You understand? And then the livelihood of individual is going down. So there's no growth rate. Using my own African development program, there's no growth rate at all. And when there's no growth rate, which implies the standard of living of people is shrinking. You understand? So, and there's no economic revolution in this aspect. Rather, you have depression or recession, which take 2 to 3 years. So if a depression takes 2 to 3 years, then the government has only 4 years lifespan. How can they survive and how can they succeed?
Very good question, and a very worrisome question. We have Bola Ahmed Tinubu's appointed Minister of Finance, Olawale Edu. He was a former banker. So what do you think? Do you think that he is capable of steering the ship to the point where Nigerians can actually breathe at the end of the day? Because you and I know that so many people are not really breathing properly now.
Yeah, you see, when I started, I said there are two important aspects of the economy. The fiscal policy as well as the monetary policy. Wale Edu is handling the fiscal aspect in terms of taxation, in terms of tax reform, in terms of revenue enhancement, possibly in terms of expenditure too. But the worrisome nature of the economy is the level of indebtedness of the economy, the peak, the growth rates, and then the modality or the strategy for the repayment of the debt.
And I heard that yesterday, where 94% of our funds are servicing the debt. Isn't that very worrisome?
Left to me, if I were to be in terms of physical something, we enter into what I call negotiation. Negotiation in the sense that, one, you now have two opposing blocks. You have the West and what we call the BRIC nations. We give our conditionalities to the World Bank that, look, if genuinely you are interested in our development, we cannot pay this debt the way you are thinking of, considering our level of revenue. And then the kind of conditionalities we are trying to, because most of the conditionalities we are following now is the backlog of what the IMF wants us to do based on the level of our indebtedness, which we cannot oppose. If not because of the international conspiracy. One, you have to believe that as a non-allied country, to go towards the BRIC nation, I say China, we are indebted to the World Bank. Can you buy up our debt and then reschedule our debt repayment in a more relaxed manner? If they say yes, definitely the IMF will not allow that to happen.
I was going to ask whether that was possible.
You understand? If they don't allow, then can we reschedule this debt properly to be in line with our economic situation so that our citizens don't pay heavily for this debt which they know nothing about? These are the basic things. Again, it's the responsibility of the Minister of Finance to see that side by side with the CBN governor. Because the Minister of Finance, one, we have to enlarge our revenue base. Because the revenue base, the taxation policy is a little bit something that we have to be expanded. They have what they call International Tax Department in FIRS right now. Our tax agreement with some of these developed world is not something. We have to revisit that tax agreement. A situation in which a country doesn't even have the bank account of even Nigerians abroad. You understand? So that to the extent that they are taxing these people to the detriment of our economy.
Our economy, exactly.
So at least we should have their bank account. Or we go into what I call a tax agreement with the developed world. If Mr. A has 20 million naira in his bank account or $20 million in his bank account, what is the rationale of you taxing? Because he's a Nigerian citizen by definition.
But he's making the money abroad.
If he's making the money, Julius Baga, they are making the money in Nigeria. But they repatriate some money. There are tax policies in Germany that make sure that all their companies operating abroad, we have to pay certain amount of this to, and they have to disclose
host country.
So whatever financial statement they prepare in this country, they have to remit it back, so that they look at the financial statement as a way of implementing some tax. Because you understand, whether you are operating in Nigeria, you're a German citizen.
Exactly.
You're a German company to start with. We are not done. We are not doing that in this country. If a Nigerian is operating in the United States, for example, is generating revenue, number 4 is in Nigeria. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
So it depends on the modality of our tax agreement or tax relationship with the developer. So first of all, for us to enhance, widen our revenue, we have to revisit the international tax agreement. Then 2, there are these maritime taxes, which has been always understated, maybe as a result of corruption or because of politics. That we have to be revisited.
Okay.
There's what they call back duty exercise. In tax, when they say back duty, there are financial statement or there are financial statement that has never either been paying tax less than what is. So you are allowed to revisit the financial statement for at least 15 years. Then you bring it back, evaluate it gradually and see what is actually due to the government. You understand? Because of the manipulative devices. Because the presentation of the bank statement sometimes, financial statement sometimes doesn't depict the actual tax payable. So these are some of the things we have to. And then the personal income tax of individual. You understand?
Yeah.
Because it has been grossly understated. Somebody is a billionaire, is paying a tax of maybe 30,000. It doesn't really make sense.
Yes, it's not
These are some of the things. So we have to value up and even de-emphasize on oil from revenue. Because the oil from revenue is very, very low when compared to other sources of.
Okay, Doc, we are really gone run out of time. So I would just like to ask you, the cabinet is set right now. Portfolios have been attached. I hear they would inaugurate them on the 21st of this month. So if you have to advise as your goodbye speech to them right today on the program, what would it be for them, knowing the situation Nigeria is at the moment economically? What would your advice be to those who have portfolios related to the economy?
Well, there are, first of all, let's take aviation for example.
Yes.
You know, aviation is something very important in the honor of this country because of tourism attraction and something and so forth. But most importantly is that the safety life of individual is very important. So the infrastructural development of the airspace and the aircraft is very fundamental. These are areas in which we will revisit so that we make comparison between our air transportation system with the developed world, at least to move to almost A or B grade in terms of flights. Now for the fiscal policy, that is the Minister of Finance, he has a lot of things to do because the reliance on oil is very, very...
It's too much. It's too much. It's bothersome.
So the only thing is that for us to pay that debt, we have to expand our revenue base to enhance our capacity. Then, unfortunately, we have to revisit those debts and then compare domestic debt with foreign debt.
Okay.
Because we have what we call domestic debt, monitored and controlled by Debt Management Office. We have to revisit them, analyze, and bring in even experts to see whether or not some of these debts are necessary or some of these debts are fortuitous. So we have to evaluate the debt situation. Then for the foreign debt, most of the foreign debt is supposed to be tied to investment or a particular infrastructural development. Are they actually done that way? These are some of the things we have to do, and I wish them the best of luck.
Nice way to end. Thank you so much. We've been talking with Dr. Abdulaziz Bala Abubakar, a financial management expert and a tax consultant. Many thanks for being on ASO Morning.
Thank you very much.